conversation with a prominent Black cannabis executive who I feel like is moving within the culture the right way and creating opportunities for more of us to come into the space and succeed and sustain as cannabis grows. This week, I have Mr. Cedric Haynes with me. We've had a few conversations prior to this. He's a director over at Weed Maps, who I think is a purveyor of cannabis culture and the legal space growing and showing that we can create sustainable businesses. So I'm excited to have you on today, my brother.
Hey, man, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem, bro. But before we jump into cannabis, I always try to get everybody's backstory prior to coming into the space to kind of communicate that, you know, everybody has a space within cannabis with their current talent. So, you know, what was your professional background? You know, what did you go to college for? And kind of what was that career path after you graduated?
Oh, man, to take it chronologically, proud Jackson, Mississippi, and I went to undergrad here. Tougaloo College, small but mighty HBCU. I feel like the best collegiate experience I could have had when I was finishing up at Tougaloo. I applied for an Emerging Leaders internship with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and was accepted. And CBCF was really instrumental in sort of guiding the trajectory of what my career path and as it relates to public policy in general was going to be. They paired me with Congressman Benny Thompson. I went up to D.C. They gave me living arrangements, which, as I'm sure you know, is extremely expensive in D.C. and in the Northeast in general. But I had the chance through the CBCF to work with his office, learn more about the issues that are affecting my home district, because Benny Thompson is the representative of the 2nd Congressional District in Mississippi, which is my home district, and really just learn up close what the public policy making process was all about and being able to understand it and learn it through the lens of actually helping the people from my hometown and my home district was really cool to me. So that's really kind of where it all first started. When I was finishing up that internship, I went to law school at Mississippi College School of Law back to Jackson. And when I was finishing my legal degree at Mississippi College, I reached back out to Benny Thompson. He was the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, now the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee at this time, and said, hey, I would love to come back. I enjoyed my experience with you. Feel like I learned a lot. I want to see if I can apply what I learned in law school to help the folks from my home district. I was really fortunate that he said yes, and the rest of it was sort of history. I started in his personal office. I did the majority of the jobs you could think of, from answering the phone, statement of papers, talking to constituents, helping with casework, whatever I could do to learn more. And eventually I transitioned to the committee staff, which you get a subject matter and you sort of drill down on one or a few specific public policy areas. My public policy areas were transportation security and homeland security. Ultimately, I became the Subcommittee Director of the Transportation Security Subcommittee in the Homeland Security Committee and a parliamentarian for the committee. One thing that I've always been interested in is cannabis policy. I did a little bit of research on it when I was in law school, and I saw an opportunity come down the pipeline from Weed Maps.
Okay, hold on. Before we jump into that, I want to kind of get a little bit of context for that. So, you know, we're both from the Deep South. I'm from Alabama, you from Mississippi, and legal cannabis hasn't made its way to the Deep South outside of Florida, but Floridian culture is kind of different from, like, you know, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee. So we don't really, even though they're the Deep South, they kind of more operate as the East Coast state, right? So what was that process for you? Because I always tell people from where we're from, like, you know, we should start taking cannabis more seriously. It's still heavily criminalized down here. You still see a lot of people get arrested for it. You know, they don't really, you know, people still get drug tested and you can fail and not get a job or get admitted to something meaningful for cannabis. So what was the catalyst for you being from Mississippi to be like, okay, I do need to take cannabis seriously because it's a real industry?
Man, it's so interesting because, you know, it's really exactly what you said. I've had experiences personally, you know, getting pulled over in Mississippi. And then the first thing that happens is, you know, that, you know, I smell cannabis. Can I search your car? Like, it's always the pretext to go a little bit further in a search. It's not uncommon. I have friends, I know you have friends as well, that have been directly impacted and had some very real consequences, whether it be for their education or, you know, losing an opportunity on a baseball team or some sort of sports, you know, like it's very real for us. So where everything collided for me was being in DC and watching DC work to pass the initiative that they passed at the same time as being from Mississippi and still sort of having that negative stigma and understanding and knowing folks who had already been adversely impacted, like, this is affecting your life in a negative way. And now I'm turning on the news and the news is telling me, like, DC is getting ready to legalize. It's going to be so much money and so many opportunities that are going to come about. So I'm like, the one part of me is like, it's something really powerful about taking something that, we generally grew up and felt so negatively and had negative experiences about, and being able to turn it on its head and like, okay, this is something that I can get into. This is something that people are absolutely watching. And I think, one of the more interesting parts about it was like just when I made the decision, like this is something I want to try to do. And then trying to talk to folks from back home and make them understand like this is an industry I want to get into, and not have them look at you like you are crazy. Do you know people still getting locked up for this? It's an uphill battle, but it's really just a microcosm for a lot of the aspects of this industry, though.
So let's transition over to what Weed Maps is for the viewers who may not be familiar with the company. What's the purpose of Weed Maps, and what's kind of your role within the company?
Yeah, so Weed Map started out as, a very basic premise. What the name says, it was a way for consumers, whether they be medicinal or adult use, to be able to find cannabis products, to be able to browse different businesses, to be able to see what those businesses have to offer. And then, that was the basic premises that it started from. But now Weed Maps is very much the operating system that's sort of powering the cannabis industry, if you will. Not only are there business to consumer solutions that you want to use to shine a light on your business and have people know that you're out there and find you based on where they are, but there also is a suite of software that allows your business to be more compliant, more efficient, and to really operate at a more seamless and efficient level. So there's a lot of business-to-business offerings there. And then what I do, particularly at Weed Maps, I'm the Director of Public Policy and Partnerships. Weed Maps is active all across the nation, internationally as well. As you and I very well know, and I know we'll get deeper into it, each state in the United States has different rules. It's sort of a different ball game, but we're active in all the states. So what our leadership realized early on was, we have access to a lot of information, and we're interfacing with a lot of different governments across the United States. Why don't we try and figure out, what's going well in these states, what's not going so well in these states, and create a government relations team to be able to help create efficient and sustainable markets. So that's what we do. We put policy papers together. We participate, host forums, try and be a supplement and a resource to industry organizations, local, state governments as they try and craft these policies. And particularly what I spend a lot of time doing is applying that skill set to the areas of social equity and social justice.
Okay, so yeah, let's touch on that for a second, just to kind of flesh out your role a little bit more. I had Jason White on a couple of months ago. He's a CMO of Curaleaf, and he said you pretty much have to treat every state like it's a different country, right? Because every state has different local municipality and state laws. So, as someone who's over government relations, how do you kind of juggle every state's requirements for you guys to operate?
Brother, it is fast and furious. A lot of times when it comes to advertisement, those rules will be governed more at the state level and not the local level. But once you get down into the nuance, especially like using California as an example, California is like you basically have to treat every city, every county, every municipality in California as if it is a different country as well, because it's a dual licensing system, right? Meaning if Los Angeles, the city, says you can't do business, then you can't get a license with the state. You got to have a license from the city and the state. So in short, it's a tremendous lift. It's a lift that I make in conjunction with a really sharp team of individuals who are tracking. We divide the states up, East Coast, West Coast. Some people focus more on the Midwest. I, of course, love to focus more on down south. But just trying to keep track of everything that's emerging and quickly decipher where the issues may be for the industry and for Weed Maps as a company is challenging. But it's something that has to be done because it's moving fast and it's not moving like all at the same time. Everybody's doing something different in little pieces. So that's basically what we do.
Okay, and moving forward to kind of how our viewers or interested entrepreneurs could possibly position themselves to involve themselves. What states do you see possibly legalizing soon, and what advice would you give for residents in those states and how to get involved on a state level to try to, benefit from cannabis once it inevitably comes to their state?
Yeah, so I would say, as far as states, there are a number of ballot initiatives that are coming down the pipeline. I particularly, because I'm a Mississippian, am interested in what's going on in Mississippi, as I'm sure you are aware too. Mississippi has two cannabis ballot initiatives that are going to be up on November 3rd. Never thought I'd say that. Never thought I'd be working on this issue in Mississippi. So that's one. New Jersey and the Northeast is experiencing a lot of movement as well. But I think one thing that's important for everybody not to miss out on is, these opportunities are coming about in different states, yes, but there are also states that have legalized, but the majority of the state still has a ban on cannabis at the local level, right? So if you're in California trying to figure out how you could take advantage of a cannabis opportunity or operate a cannabis business, even though it's legal in the state, it may still be illegal at the city level. And one of the things that we're also seeing is that there are a lot of cities and counties, municipalities in California that are coming on board too. How can you get involved? I think there's a number of different ways, but the first thing is using myself as an example. What you do now, like ownership is one thing. And I know we come into ownership because it's a huge issue, but what you do now is probably needed in the cannabis industry. Cannabis is still a very, very nascent industry. Again, using myself as an example, my job in Congress was to understand the rules, negotiate the rules, talk to stakeholders, listen to various perspectives and use it to craft policy and do oversight of the federal government. When I was first looking to get into the cannabis industry, I was thinking to myself, like, man, I need to figure out how I can own a dispensary, or I gotta, I know a guy, maybe we could do something together, put together a grow, like a craft grow. But lo and behold, like my opportunity that came down the pipeline for me was me doing exactly what I did in the federal government for a cannabis company. So whether you are, whether you're into business management, whether you're an accountant, you like to do security work, supply chain, anything that you do, I guarantee you that there is some nexus to the cannabis industry. So I always say start there.
I think a lot of Americans, we get caught up on the presidential election. What's the importance of being involved in congressional elections, congressional campaigns on the state and national level? Because the Congress has, from my understanding, a much more influential role on how cannabis is scheduled throughout the country than the executive office.
Yeah, I mean, legislation, if we were just to do like public policy making 101, at a very, very basic level, a bill is drafted by an author. It has to pass the House of Representatives. It has to pass the Senate. It goes to the president's desk. And if the president signs it, it becomes a law. Like there's a lot more nuance in there. Like the committees, like I worked on, play a big role in that process, but at a very basic level, that's it, right? But as a constituent, the representative that you vote for is framing his opinion on cannabis, how it should be scheduled, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, based on the feedback that he's receiving from the folks who vote for him and send him to represent them in Congress. So understanding your representative or your senator's point of view as it relates to cannabis, if that's the linchpin issue that you think is going to propel you to go and vote, and everybody should vote. If that's the issue, like you got to interface with these folks. You need to understand how they feel about these issues before you go cast your vote. And if you're in a situation where you already have cast a vote or we're past the election cycle, you still got to call those offices and you got to weigh in and tell them, like, I'm your constituent. This is how I feel about cannabis. And ask them, frankly, how do you feel about cannabis? And there's going to be a staffer that's dedicated to this issue that is going to tell you where their member stands. And you got to advocate for yourself. If you think it's good for economic reasons, if you see the medicinal benefit and the value there, if it's more of a libertarian angle you have, you just think, it's my personal right, whatever the case may be, it's on us to convey that to our elected officials. President is important. Your senator is important. Your congressman is important. At the local level, your mayor is important. Local control is a huge issue. Your city council members are important. Your district attorney, every elected official is important. So never miss the ball in terms of like the president is the end all be all. This is the most important piece. It is not. The closer you get to the people are the most important parts. But we all have to be involved.
Right, I agree wholeheartedly. I also want to get your opinion on the effects, because I've had several conversations with guests on here, and it's kind of split down the middle. Some of us feel like federal legalization is going to be this great thing where we all get the benefit, and nationwide we see this renaissance around cannabis, and then others feel like that federal legalization may harm the Black entrepreneur or the underfunded entrepreneur in cannabis. Kind of what's your take on federal legalization at this point, and do you think minorities are positioned well to take advantage of it right now?
So on scheduling, I think it's absolutely absurd that cannabis is a Schedule I drug and classified with harmful, addictive substances that in this, as the classification states, it has no medicinal value. I feel like we're past that, right? So I think that's ridiculous. But I think that, relating this to the last question we just talked about, if you look at what's happening in the cities and the counties and the states themselves, and our efforts to try and diversify and include our people into the industry, I feel like it could absolutely be a microcosm for things to come. Because a lot of the things that you hear about is that, the federal government basically so far has taken an approach that, like, so long as you don't run afoul of these very specific guideposts, we're leaving it up to the states to determine how they should implement and run their marketplaces. And, it just is what it is. Like the majority of us have been locked out of these marketplaces. And I know we'll get deeper into like social equity and what it means. Is it about race? Is it about disproportionate impact? But if you just take it for what it is, like, brother, we people who look like us represent less than 3% of the industry, depending on which poll you look at. All of them are in the low single digits. And the one that came down, I believe, from Massachusetts lately in terms of their social equity licenses, I believe it stands at 1.2%. So I think the second part of your question was how can we get involved?
How do you think minority entrepreneurs are positioned once federal legalization comes across? Just to give you a little bit more context, I've had guests say that federal legalization isn't going to have much verbiage that directly benefits the Black or brown entrepreneur. So do you feel like that's important? That has to be in the framework of federal legalization to make sure that big tobacco or big alcohol just doesn't come in and just consume the entire industry?
Yeah, no, I feel like it's absolutely important. The more explicit we can be around, one, gathering the data and metrics associated with where we stand in the industry now from the federal government's purview, could be the basis of what the federal government can use to make sure that we really get a footprint within this industry, right? So I like to make an analogy, and no analogy is a perfect analogy when it comes to cannabis because it's definitely its own beast, but like the 8A program. Like one of the things that I did in Congress, it was the oversight of transportation security and the security, public policies and whatnot, but it was also holding the government accountable when it created metrics to include disadvantaged businesses. And right now, you look all across the nation, every city, every state that has a social equity program, there's a recognition that folks who are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, who disproportionately look like you and me, are not reaping the benefits that come along with cannabis legalization at any level. So before we even talk about the federal government, there's some things, in municipalities and states that we have to get past first, because right now there's really no shining example of a city or a state that has done that has implemented a social equity program. And social equity does not necessarily mean Black. I know we'll get to that point too, but that doesn't leave folks who are already hurt by the war on drugs further hurt by the war on drugs. So we really need to work to create more examples and more of a template for rules that actually codify lanes for people who look like us to be able to get into the industry and take advantage.
And to expound on what you said, for our viewers who may not be familiar, social equity is basically a license that's designated to someone who's underrepresented. That may be a Black person, brown person, military veteran, LGBTQ, basically any segment of Americans that may not have a lot of representation or access to capital or opportunity. That's what a social equity license is. But on top of what you said, I think it's important that we figure out how we sustain these people, because a lot of people get these social equity licenses and they don't have the capital, they don't have the access to the capital or affordable capital at that. So they take predatory investments and they end up losing their license or just not really understanding how to operate. So I think that also is something that's equally important.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. And in the vein of what you just said, it's like there's licensing is in a cannabis license, whether it be a social equity license or not, is like the gold star, right? Like everybody look at it like this is it. If we get the license, we have made it. Like without the understanding, like you getting the license is not you finishing the race in first, second, or third place. If first, second, and third place all get to operate, that's you getting in the door. You bought the cleats, you got the bib, you got the shorts. The race hadn't even started yet. Like you basically now have a ticket to get into the race. And because we all put such a microscope and focus on the licenses themselves, I think people missed a very important piece that you're talking about, which is like this ain't the ultimate. This ain't the goal. This ain't the goal. It's just a part of the checklist, right? Like, you got the license, that's a part of the checklist. Now, how do you compete? How do you create sustainable, efficient business practices? How do you create opportunities for your people, for your community to participate in this economy and be able to do well for themselves as well? So it's absolutely an issue. And like, you know, one of the crazy things to pick up on something else you just said is, you know, the way every state and every city will have a different varying definition of what social equity is, but it's usually some mix of like, you were impacted by the war on drugs, you fall below a certain economic threshold, or you live within a community that was over-policed during the war on drugs. So it's like, to understand that definition often includes that you fall below a certain economic threshold, and then understand that a license that is cheap is probably going to cost you like $200,000, $300,000, way up into the millions, just for you to be competitive and have a compelling application, and not be able to provide the tools and resources with the understanding that we don't have the money to be able to participate, is really leaving a lot of people in worse shape than they were before they tried to get licenses. So it's absolutely a problem.
Definitely. And the last thing I want to transition to before I let you go, in your role in the relationships that you have with the government and legislators, was there any effect over the past year or so when we saw all of these large multi-state operators like MedMen or Aurora or Canopy start to fold and become insolvent? What effect do you feel like that had over cannabis in the long term? Because I think a lot of people have started to devalue the competence of a lot of cannabis executives because they saw all of these large companies go under in such a fast and embarrassing way, honestly.
Yeah, I can't speak to the companies themselves, but I think that, you know, what we're learning, I think the past year is just full of a bunch of different lessons. One is to even circle back again to the topic that we just talked about. The license is only a part of the process. Even, and, you know, we understand that it takes money for you to get a license, to be able to have that license and to be able to compete. But, you know, after you get the license, the competition itself and having a sustainable business is still key. It's still key. Also, what we've seen in the last year and what we're learning is like there's a and just to go off topic just a little bit, but there's more when it comes to our interaction with state and local governments. There's more interest in cannabis and cannabis legalization now in this past year than I've seen before I came into the industry in 2016 or 2017, whichever year it was. I think it was 2017. But the reason is because, you know, in addition to all the excellent, you know, advocacy and lobbying work that has gone on to, you know, convey the medicinal value and economic opportunities, we're now in a place where all of the economies are, for lack of a better term, wrecked. We're in an interesting place. COVID has put a stall and a halt on a lot of things, a lot of different businesses. So the first interesting thing that happened that was positive for the industry was that in the majority of states where cannabis is legal, cannabis was designated as essential, the sector, right? So while there are other businesses that are closing, you still have this cannabis economy in your state or in your city, possibly, that's operating, creating jobs. These people are going to get gas, they're going to get food or whatnot. So it's really helping out the economy. But the other thing is everybody's looking at cannabis as a possible economic driver to sort of shore up some of the shortfalls. So, I mean, if I could just do like an overarching statement of everything we've talked about and wrap it into this question, it's like, you know, as state and local governments talk to me and talk to anybody about what a cannabis marketplace could look like for them, it's important for us all to advocate for social equity programs so that folks who are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs have an opportunity to participate. And that's at every level. That's federal government. That's when a city hits you up and asks you what you think and what the prospects could be. That should be an integral part of it, and it should be where you start the conversation. And also important is to make sure that as these cities and states come online and as the federal government marches forward on these issues, it's like, there are many folks who are locked up and still adversely impacted from a plant that we are now deciding is okay, and one that we now are recognizing in memorialized ways the medical efficacy. So any way that you could rectify those diverse impacts to these individuals, it just has to be done.
Definitely, man. I appreciate your perspective. This is the first, outside of we've had a senator or two on, but this is the first time I've ever had somebody on who can speak on like government relations at length, the government's role and vantage point of cannabis. So I definitely appreciate that. I would love for you to wrap up with, where we can follow your company, Weed Maps, and also for any viewers who may want to reach out to you directly via maybe LinkedIn or social media, how could they find you?
For me personally, Cedric Haynes at Weed Maps on LinkedIn is the best way to find me. To follow Weed Maps at Weed Maps across all platforms. Yeah, man, I really appreciate you for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope we get to talk again.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. As we talked before this, we have a couple of projects that both sides of our companies are working on, and I look forward to working with you again, my brother.
Yeah, man. We did part two. Will definitely have to be about some of the offerings that we have going. I'd be remiss if I did not mention, if you have a social equity business and a social equity license that we can verify, please reach out to us at weedmaps.com/social equity to learn more about the offerings that we have that can benefit your business.